All right.
It's all you.
Well, welcome to this week's episode of the Hypergraph Hour. For those of you coming into for the first time, this is our weekly call that we talk to the community about anything from the business side of how Constellation works, the technology. Sometimes I leak random announcements, hidden secrets, hidden gems of, I don't know, I just let my mouth go. But mostly this is here to educate the community and get people excited on what we're building and why we're building it and what to expect coming down the road. So over the past couple of weeks, we've brought in advisors, Rahito Hatayama, who is the former CEO of Hello Kitty, partner at Sozo Ventures that backed Coinbase and Palantir. Then Matthias and I presented the roadmap for the Lattice Exchange several weeks ago, the roadmap for Constellation. So I would say this is like anything that you're coming into the Hypergraph Hour, you're getting info from the horse's mouth. You're getting it probably fresh off the press. And really, we actually get really excited to come in here because we kind of show what we're building and help everybody connect the dots into our journey. So today, Benjamin Diggles is stepping in to walk through his efforts with the federal government, how we're productizing solutions around data assurance for the federal government, which I think will ground what we're working on. And then towards the end, I'll kind of connect the dots for everybody on how that relates to the L0 standard. So our standard, much like an ERC20 token. So without further ado, Benjamin Diggles, our Chief Revenue Officer, our Head of Business Development, and probably one of the most articulate people that you'll meet when it comes to business partnerships and relationships.
You're a good man. Appreciate that. Heck of an intro. It's I'm sitting here staring out this window and I see these three hawks flying around, and I think it's apropos that we are flying high at Constellation. There's my cheesy U.S. Air Force intro. Excited to walk through this stuff. Those that know me, I am in charge of the business development arm of Constellation, which has been a really great journey, but it has been an exploration effort to the furthest extent. And I do want to address those that are maybe newer to this and haven't heard some of the progress that we've made over the years and why we've done this, and bring them up to speed a little bit, but I won't spend too much time on our efforts in the past. That said, what we're going to go through today is an update on what's happening with our efforts in federal. This is a very important piece to our strategy. When we started this, we didn't go after federal with the idea that, hey, we're going to be a government validated technology, but realized that the government was upwards of 3 to 4 times ahead in the discovery efforts of distributed ledger technology, which is kind of there's this stigma that the government moves slow and they're behind on everything. And that really is very true in a lot of paradigms. But I uncovered why our commercial efforts were a little bit slower. So I'm going to touch on that just to kind of frame it up a little bit here. So our adoption focus areas have been, I've in my brain kind of split these into 2 worlds, because I noticed that if I had any conversation, it was a hard line that they were either legacy or they were emerging. And in the legacy world, I talk about being born a vampire. It's kind of cheesy, but it makes it a little bit fun considering we talk so much tech. The analogy I look at is those that are born a vampire, those that are in the merging versus legacy needs to be converted. They need to be changed into a vampire, which is a much harder process. And a good example of that is if you think about like Uber as an example, I look at them as an entity that was born a vampire, meaning that they came into a world that was built on top of the smartphone. If the smartphone didn't exist and allow us to essentially hail cars wherever we're located, they couldn't do business, right? I mean, it would be a lot harder if they tried to do it through text messaging and phone calls. Still possible, but I guess that's what a taxi service is. So for them to go from a company that already existed in a world and come into that that new paradigm is rather hard. And so we, in the business development efforts, largely that myself, Mr. Jorgensen and Matthias go after, falls into one of these categories. And Ben and Matthias are largely focused a lot on that emerging world that involves a lot of those crypto tools. My pedigree comes from the legacy world. Those that don't know, prior to Constellation, I was with Oracle. I've been in enterprise and big tech. I've been in tech for over 20 years now, but really enterprise for the last 10. And my intention of joining Constellation, the founders, and really bringing this thing to fruition was I didn't want to sell vaporware. I didn't want to sell hype. And I'm not saying that crypto is hype. It's not, but it's largely undefined in many ways. Whereas when we look at some of these legacy systems, these existing systems that and IT systems that these companies have invested in, that's a lot of technical debt that they have to figure out how to get out of their way. And they see these new shiny objects like blockchain, and they want all those promises to come in, but that adoption hurdle is rather big. And for those that don't know, one of Constellation's largest differentiators that I'm super happy about, because it makes my job a lot easier, is that we don't require changes to existing IT infrastructure in order to use the value of our blockchain protocol. That's a big differentiator from some of the more popular ones out there, such as Ethereum, where you have to learn how to code a Solidity contract and bring on new devs with new discipline. All of those things represent red flags across the board when it comes to legacy, whether it's enterprise or federal. But going back to what I said earlier about how federal is about 3x, 4x ahead, the epiphany, and some people may have caught this from one of my last talks, is that enterprise looks at data and really, especially when you get into finance, as return on investment, or they look at that data as intellectual property. You hear data is the new oil, or data is the gold, and all that stuff. Very true. And it's a differentiator. If you have IP that's in the form of data, you're going to be pretty cautious about how that gets out there, who sees it, and in what paradigm. Whereas federal, they think of the data as their efforts as impact, right? So if we go in there and say, hey, we can be more cost effective and so forth, they're going to tune it out. But if we say we can help your mission impact and capabilities to help with your initiatives, they start to open up their ears a little bit more. So I know that may not be profound, but it explains kind of the mindset as to why federal says, hey, we have all this data, we have data management problems, and it's siloed, it's all over the place. Anything that can help our workflow so that we can make quicker decisions against adversaries, save lives and so forth, they're going to take a hard look at it. And it's kind of sad, but the government doesn't really think about how they're going to save money when it comes to government budgets. So that's a whole other thing to talk about, but the money's on the table to be spent for these things. And so there really is an effort of open arms to bring emerging solutions in to create impact. On the emerging side, those that are born of Vampire, these are net new tools that essentially live on top of this new blockchain ecosystem. And it doesn't matter if it's, Hyperledger or Chainlink or, Constellation, Polkadot, Ethereum, doesn't matter. These are all new solutions that are built on top of these networks that didn't exist upwards of 5+ years ago. Bitcoin, you look at 10 years, but still, the art of what's possible is starting to capture people's minds. And we don't know what we don't know, much like back in the day, RSS was really simple syndication, was the best form of being able to relay information. So a lot of effort went into it in the late 90s and early 2000s to really stretch it out, but it hit a ceiling rather quickly. It's like you can't keep repurposing the same small thing to do all of these magical tasks if it's limited in nature. And we're starting to see that happen with some of these solutions that have born really great, cool new crypto solutions. And that works as well as like decentralized applications, things that require a blockchain to work. Whereas in legacy, they can still use duct tape and bubble gum and a whole bunch of stuff. While it may not be efficient, that's largely been the argument. Like, well, why would I need blockchain for that? And, it's easy to argue yourself out of wanting to absorb a solution like this if the status quo is good enough. So the thing that Ben is going to touch on later on here is that the one thing that these all have in common is state channels. So state channels, every one of these has a different book of business that is a framework. So think of a state channel as a framework in which you can configure your business logic for the needs of that customer or that business. And this could be all the way down to a single entrepreneur trying to do something new, just like the friends over at Instagram that launched that solution back in the day using open source tools, all the way to large enterprise. And in the federal world, they're looking for, data validation. And what's interesting is when we went into federal, we were all piped up on saying stuff like we can help with threat vectors, mesh networks, situational awareness. And we weren't saying those things because they were buzzwords. We were saying those things because those really matter. These are initiatives that we see out there that they're funding and so forth that are very visible. But as we peel back the onion a little bit, they're like, hey, those things are really great and all. But if we were able to cryptographically secure like a piece of data that's living in a large stream so that it could be passed across whatever network or stored anywhere we want and hit the compliance measures that it doesn't need to be scrubbed and manually handled through a secret service network or whatnot, that would transform all of those things you're talking about, from mesh networks to artificial intelligence, situational awareness. Those are all kind of for naught if they still have to scrub and mask and claw back and protect information that's flowing from many different domains at one time that then need to be consumed or pushed out to those that are ingesting it. So that was a surprise to us because it was like we were up here and they're like, actually, the devil is in the details. And so we're going to walk through a little bit of what that looks like in practice through a use case here. But I'm going to get to the $1 million question everybody here has been asking. Everybody's like, where the heck are you guys at with your federal engagements? How come we haven't seen any news? The obvious answer is that there's certain things we can't talk about. And I'll touch on like the process of what that looks like for those that don't understand federal. And the other thing is that when you think about multi-domain, which actually I can go to here, we won our very first contract around multi-domain command and control. Now think of domains as siloed data sets. You got troops on the ground, you got planes in the sky, you got satellites, all these things that are under the preview of DoD have their own data sets, their own protocols, their own way of doing what they do. And when you send all that data together, it's rather complicated. And even commercial businesses are dealing with this on things such as the, CRM level, like you have all types of customers, they're on Facebook, they got newsletters, like it's really tough to bring data together. But when you're adding on top of it the compliance regulations that something is super secret, maybe there's some really cool weaponry that no one's supposed to know about it, but it's now bundled into this streaming data that needs to be masked, it becomes a much bigger task than what you see in just the commercial space. So we went after multi-domain command and control because it really did pull out the promise of what our technology does best, which is, hey, we're able to cryptographically secure and notarize that data at the source using data validation or data schemas that say, hey, if this type of data comes in, make sure that it does not go through these networks, or that it's secured so that it can't be opened, but only by those that have the appropriate keys and so forth. And so when you think about multi-domain command and control, it brings to fruition the ability of bringing all this data into an automated fashion. And it's no easy task. So to answer the $1 million question, why this is taking so long, is that we have to get buy-in, not just from a single point of entry, because we're not selling a point solution. We're not like, hey, we have this thing that will make sure that your PDFs, are redacted on the fly. And they're like, okay, that's really great. And there's a need for that. And people get funding for that. And that's wonderful. For us, when you think about these guys do their work this way, these gals do their work this way, we have to get them on the phone and say, hey, do you agree that there's a need here? And there's always a yes to that. But then it comes down to, okay, how are we actually going to prove out the promise that everybody's been wanting for a long time, which is the interoperation of these the secure data sets. So in Q3 2019, Constellation our first phase one contract under multi-domain command and control. And this is turned into joint all-domain command and control. So you may hear me use those names interchangeably, but that basically just means bringing data together in a very automated way. Winning a phase one contract is not an easy feat, especially when you're talking an emerging solution that has a whole bunch of scrutiny around it, right? Bitcoin's wonderful for the markets, but it does no favor when it comes to some of these engagements because people get confused thinking that Bitcoin is blockchain. And it is and it isn't, right? And so we're very proud to say that once we won that contract, we're in with the federal government forever. Sorry, 1 minute. I don't know why my screen sharing got paused. Stop. There we go. Hopefully.
Well, why Benjamin kind of addresses that, I'll just jump in and say that a lot of what Benjamin's doing is it's not completely, it's not like a brand new process. Last week I talked about Palantir going through the same process. Where they're now a $43 billion market capitalization. They IPO'd last year, and they went down this path of securing government contracts and building relationships where now they completely own every data-oriented contract that comes out of the federal government. And then they pursued a path to enterprise adoption as well. So a lot of what Benjamin's talking about is following the same footsteps that Splunk, Palantir, many of the Cloudera, Databricks have all followed a similar suit in navigating the federal government by procuring data contracts.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. And I'll pick this up because I could be a little bit verbose here. So we won this contract, we're in, which is great. Through that effort, we decided to deploy a few other opportunities. One that we got was Navy. We got a Navy phase one contract, which is quote unquote selectable, which is a new category within these acquisition offices that's taken place in the last 12 months. Unfortunately, Constellation has gotten caught in that world, which basically says your pitch, your proposal is completely valid. We need this thing. We just right now don't have funds with everything that's going on, so now you have the ability to go out and shop it with whoever you wants to fund it and so forth. And that one was under remote systems for digital logistics at scale. Q2 of 2020, we were also selectable for our phase two contract, which was around blockchain security of mission data. The reason that this was pushed into selectable is because COVID was the big thing that everybody got money around. And then we also, just Q1, we were placed as selectable again. And the reason why, and this is something I want to educate people on, is there's a lot of constituents here. This is not a point solution. So they look at this as like a risk reduction type of thing, right? And so the reason why we're put into selectable is because they say, okay, great, this is really a great solution, but we feel like it might be a little risky considering you have all of these constituents. Fine, that's totally fine. But what's happened in that amount of time is a lot of really great stuff. That's why it's been painful with the community, because I can't go out and say, oh, we've been funded through the SBIR office, which is nothing more than a funding vehicle, and we're off to the races and everybody all pops bottles and it's great. That hasn't necessarily taken place and we're working towards it, but so many other good things have taken place to foundationally set us up for this. And when I say selling the DoD, there's three different groups. You have the program office, like a Pentagon. They're the ones that denote that they have a need. You have the end users, the people that are like, yeah, I'm in the day-to-day of knowing what it's like to deal with this data. And then you have acquisition offices or funding vehicles. And these are the folks that say, okay, we have a certain amount of money in our budget, and then we have to work with different contacts to push it out. We've sold the heck out of the program offices in the DoD, and we're just trying to find the right funding vehicle so that this is in the right initiative, because they're rather stringent on how they do this stuff. So we secured more validation from program offices and key stakeholders. That's the thing, working with the SBIR office, they said, hey, if you guys can get bigger names on this thing, this will make a big difference in our risk reduction. So we did that. These are things that I'm going to show here in a second, but we weren't allowed to announce. Constellation, we partnered with the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth to accelerate research grants. So we decided, hey, we know that there's a lot of opportunity around these universities that are kind of, we've been approached by a lot of them, but we have to select one or two of them that we're going to go deep with. And that's the partner that we decided. Tomorrow I have a really great call with them. And we've already done some great research around socializing drones using mesh networks. We also appended multiple partner contacts as a key capability in critical ecosystems. So when you think about a network, you have everything from analyzing, reporting, dashboards, you have hosting environments. There's all these different pieces from the ecosystem, because that's why you keep hearing me say it, that play a role in making this thing come to fruition. That's why I've been working on partnerships like Splunk, and AWS. Like, these are things that all touch pieces of the trusted environment in which the federal government work. We also started to onboard select public partners as node operators. And this is something we're going to share a little bit down the road, but just starting to get people's brains understanding that this is the real bridge between the emerging and the legacy, is you start to get their heads involved in the art of what's possible around these crypto economies, and get them involved in understanding what it means to validate our distributed network and be a validator on that, and how that translates into them opening their own network. So in Q3 2020, our goal here is to deploy our first United States Air Force multi-domain state channel. And Ben will talk a little bit about what that means towards the end as far as practice, but this is creating a state channel. It's a book of business specific for the US Air Force that handles the ingestion of multi-domain data. These are things I'm very excited to share, but you got to understand I have to be sensitive about it. So that's why a lot of the information here has been redacted.
Really
they call it for, yeah.
Benjamin, sorry. On the last slide, those are 2021, those dates. Sorry, didn't mean to.
Oh, did I? I may have missed.
Just wanted to offer that clarity. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. Appreciate that. So these are the things we're really, really freaking excited to announce. Over the holidays, I got my first letter of support from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, which has since then been updated. We're in constant contact with these folks every week, chomping at the bit. They want blockchain solutions. They see Constellation as the leader of this effort, because we are a base layer protocol that can handle the throughput without the use of state channels. While they really like what state channels do, they have seen it as a limitation to what they want to do around mission planning data, which is not only complex, but vast in size, right? And so we got a letter of support signed by the Secretary of Defense office. Let that sink in. It doesn't get any bigger than that. Unfortunately, this came in after we were able to submit it to the SBIR office. So we got on the phone with them. They were like, sorry, Charlie, we can't include this, but we can with your next effort, which is fine. That's why we updated it. We also got an updated letter of support from Air Mobility Command, showing that they continually see the effort here of this, or the importance of this effort. And those that have followed what I've announced as far as our partnerships, Kinemi is a decentralized storage solution that really, since we don't store data, really brings the end-to-end from data being created in transit or at the source, all the way to it being stored on some thumb drive on somebody's desk, God knows where, right? And we have the full preview of this, that it is totally secure end-to-end. Very proud of these pieces of paper. These are going to make a huge impact in our effort this year. We even had another one here, which is another validated piece of support, which is one from the Air Operations Center. So the point is, and I just was informed last night from our contact, we have another one coming in this week. So they're starting to pour in. And so we get, and I just put over here that cost of domain equals multiple constituents. So when my proposal has 3 program offices, 5 end users, 1 commercial reserve air fleet partner, 3 public sector partners, and 12 stakeholders and staff functions. Let that sink in. Like, this is a lot of people have signed this to say, yes, we want to see this happen. So we often get compared to these other outfits like Simba Chain. God bless Simba Chain. I have nothing but good things to say about their team. But the reason they're winning deals is because they have a very easy to use smart contract builder that does proof of concepts very quickly. And it helps them see if there's a there. But I just don't believe that it's going to scale into real meaningful business, whereas we're at the table in an area that no one wants to touch. And I say that because supply chain management, whether it's from shipping or sea, that's fine. Like those are areas that have a lot of traction around Hyperledger Fabric, IBM, Maersk, FedEx. I could drop names all day. No one wants to touch air because the data is very complex and it's very big. And Constellation is the only blockchain company at the table right now working with these groups to make this happen. And they're open to competition. So it's not like they're shedding, like we're isolated or we have exclusivity. That's against the law. But there's just no one else that can prove what we've been able to validate at this level. So this is a very sensitive slide that I had to spend a half an hour to scrub because they would break my fingers. Yeah, I'm not allowed to share names of who exactly we're working with, but I can share the flow here, and I'm okay sharing the key partner names, but it kind of points to the complexity of what we're working at. I took the names out of the different domain constituents and I just numbered them so you can see all the different pieces here. And so if you look at the far left here, this is a good example of where mission planning data comes in from a streaming source where somebody has a need. Hey, we just triggered an event that says, hey, we need this thing to be done, right? So that gets into the form of what they call a bid tender. And it's kind of like a bartender. So that's where it's created and then it is sent to a second domain institution that receives it. And they then take that on. So it has to be created, then received, 2 domains. That receives it has to send that bid tender out to a commercial reserve air fleet partner to say who wants to take this gig. And these are isolated approved folks, right? So they send that out. One of them accepts it. So now we have 3 domains. That acceptance comes back down to the second domain. So keep in mind that this data is top secret. This cannot be communicated via email or many other ways that we're used to. So it has to go through pipes that are used for data that has been deemed compliant in order for it to go over. And so that's where that air gap comes in place. This is where the manual stuff starts to come out and it bogs them down. So then once it then is scrubbed and isolated and they know that it's going over the right pipes, that then goes to domain 4. And that's the pipe handler, right? And this pipe handler then takes that tender bid that's been turned into a mission contract, and they go ahead and they send it back to the commercial reserve air fleet partner as approved, and then they absorb the requirements to execute against that bid. And of course, the creator of the data at the very beginning monitors all of this and analyzes it in real time as it's going through the mission. And of course, we have Splunk here as the monitoring device or the monitoring tool for this. So I don't expect all of this to make sense, and it's a little bit complicated, but in a nutshell, you have data that's traveling end to end from one end to the other, touching a lot of domains that have different compliance and regulations. And they want to know that we can cryptographically secure it at the source so that no matter where it goes, it can get there in an automated, quick sense without them having to scrub it and pull it out and so forth. And this is the foundational layer for everything like mesh networks, securing satellites, all this stuff that everybody sees as a point entry for a use case is predicated on this fundamental right here. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ben. Ben, are you cool jumping in at this point, talking a little bit about how what I just described is going to turn into, the L0 standard being the pathways, the framework to making this come to fruition?
Yeah, I really want to let that, following up with what you just said is pretty it takes a moment to sit back and think about what the impact of our technology is. And when you look at it this is an essential piece of how the entire world is going to be operating in the future. This isn't like a small contract that helps like creating a little app. This is literally defining how data processes need to be improved for the future for an entire organization to flourish, be protected, and be more efficient. And these are problems that every entity has across the globe. So the impact of our technology could actually and will actually bring this whole new way of doing business in digital systems and infrastructures. So all of these validation letters and letters of support, think of those as separate businesses that are all saying, hey, we need this across the entire organization, and we're going to sign up for it. We're going to sign up for it. We're going to sign up for it, because they're all interconnected and they're all seeing the issues that exist. But, the big question is, yeah.
I just want the last thing I say is just before you take over, and the big question here, because I can't wait to hear it, is I forgot to mention our role with Space ISAC, and that I am speaking on a webinar coming up in a few weeks, which we'll share the link to those that want to join, around cybersecurity maturity model certification. Not stuff you talk about on our first date, but very important. And I'm going to be on that panel as an emerging blockchain solution with Lockheed Martin and Booz Allen Hamilton. So I just want to plug that, because somebody mentioned, why aren't you partnered with SpaceX? It's like, well, we could partner with one company or partner with the consortia that sets standards for all of these different companies to come together under security of satellites. So I forgot to mention that. You're back on, Ben. I apologize.
Yeah, well, to that point, what you're doing in Space ISAC and the partners that are on the board with you next, or the panel with you next week, are essentially realizing that they've largely missed the data initiative, and they are very keen to understand the next evolution of where data is going. Palantir doing big data insights and analytics, Splunk offering monitoring dashboards and alerting capabilities. And now, how do we secure these giant infrastructures that we've created, is really what Benjamin's tackling with Space ISAC, which, and sitting on that panel, you've got some of the bigger players in the defense contracting world that are making a huge fight for being the pioneers of the next evolution of infrastructure. So it's a pretty critical chat. When you think about how does data get transferred. So Space ISAC is a consortia that we were the first blockchain to join. I think it's one of the most incredible achievements that we've joined, because they are once again getting all the players in the room to go, hey, we have a real issue. When you look at satellites and all the data that's used around satellites, if those are spoofed, you could compromise the global economy. So for example, satellites are regulating the food supply chain. And they share data with everybody from logistics at Amazon to governing what crops get planted and when. And if you hack that system, you could alter basically humanity. And they are seeing that you have to share data between systems, but there is a huge gap in the protection of those systems. So kudos to you, man. Thank you for putting that together and walking through. It's an incredible achievement. And a lot of what you saw today in those diagrams is how we're productizing data assurance. Now, how does that relate to Constellation? How does that relate to DAG? What does it mean when we're talking about the L0 standard? That's what I'm going to try to relay right here. So maybe you want to go to the next slide. So I put together this slide as a way to show our strategy on onboarding enterprise partners, as well as for people to understand what the L0 standard is and how we use state channels and microservices as a framework for that L0 standard. So I'm going to walk you a little bit through the process that you'll see over the next year, which relates not only to enterprise, but to how we're onboarding enterprise partners. So our first kind of iteration on the left-hand side is around node deployment. So we took an approach last year to onboard node operators for them to understand the basics of DevOps and be able to spin up a node through AWS, StackPath, DigitalOcean. And this was kind of our first MVP around state channels, if you will, or our L0 standard. But what that really meant in terms of data data is a transaction. A transaction is data. It's a very simple data set. And so when we opened this up to the community to be node operators, they were validating transaction data. They are validating the network state. They are participating in that. And that is the first iteration of securing complex data, like what Benjamin is doing with the enterprise and that entire diagram. But it starts with a node, and that's really our MVP. And so the way that I think about it, if you look at like Hashgraph and Libra Coin by Facebook, what they did in their strategy is they went out and they sold nodes to enterprise customers saying, hey, start to see what this world looks like, what it is to start validating transactions, what it's like to be a part of a blockchain ecosystem. And they largely ignored the crypto community, which is why I believe they haven't gotten the support around what they're doing. We took the opposite approach. We wanted to go to the crypto community and be like, hey, this is a democratic platform. This is built by the community. And therefore, that was our approach first. So I don't think that Libra or Hashgraph were wrong. I just don't think they were right in how they approached their strategy to bridge the enterprise gap and get more people on board using blockchain technology. And so we took a approach to go to the community. And so our next phase is around node deployment. Node deployment V2 is what Wyatt and his team is working on, which includes one-click node management. So for anybody in enterprise or a developer in an enterprise organization, somebody that's in a legacy infrastructure team that's building out solutions, they don't really want to manage a node at such an early emerging tech position. So we're essentially productizing the management of a node so that any enterprise customer can work. So SMEs would be small, medium, and enterprise customers will be able to be onboarded to start managing their node. Once again, that's their introduction into blockchain, what it means to be a part of a globally distributed network that validates data. And during this phase, we're also going to be releasing the DAG terminal, or the blockchain business management tool. Once again, making this so simple for people to go in and manage their node. And that becomes the first step of onboarding really anybody to using scalable blockchain technology. From there, we'll have our subset of, mix of small, medium enterprise customers, our mix of crypto community node validators, that then we start to say, hey, you know how you're validating transactions on our network? Well, we're now opening up the L0 standard. And here's documentation on how you can define your data types in more detail. This relates to our choice of using state channels and microservices as a framework that sits behind the node deployment. So these nodes will start to redefine data types. It'll be more complex. We'll be able to add in business logic. And for what does that mean to the crypto community? That means you'll be able to define a token type. And this morning I released a paper that we wrote as a team that starts to trickle out what our tokenomics will look like and how each person that builds an L0 token will be able to define their token types with certain business logic that relates to business activity, whether that's revenue, interest bearing, dividend bearing, all within their L0 token. And so you see just from these three layers that you go from onboarding an individual, of seeing how they validate transactions, and then you piecemeal, you educate people on what it means to validate complex data. And by the way, here's how you create your own token with various business logic. And this goes the same way for somebody in the government. Here's your documentation to add your data type to cryptographically secure on the network, which then that opens up the ability for cross-chain interoperability and global liquidity, which is kind of like the aha moment of connecting all these things. So that really Constellation becomes the global exchange or network for all data. once again, data meaning transactions all the way to securing complex data types from what Benjamin's working on in the military, while Lattice Exchange becomes that interface for global liquidity across the blockchain ecosystem. And so you start to think about, well, why does, everybody's like, why is Constellation a feeless network? Because when you think about it in terms of a city, in cities you have toll roads, and that is like one road that you pay a toll to go from A to B. But an entire city doesn't function on a toll road. An entire city functions on water, electricity, all variables that are very predictable that are required for a city to thrive. So we think of Constellation more as that water, if you will. We want people to use it for everything. And then if you want to go on a toll road that's got a high transaction fee for using that bridge, well, you go do it, you build it, we don't care. We just want to provide that city infrastructure so that you can create on top of it. And this is why Lattice will be so valuable in the future, because people will see that you can do all activity within Lattice that's built on Constellation, because we provide those open roads. Where a toll road is just A to B, there's a myriad of roads that don't have tolls, but connect you to other business activity. It's a really big vision to think about. So going back to what Benjamin was talking about, really Benjamin's efforts will become its own L0 state channel. It will become its own business that has business logic embedded in it, so that when he procures a contract, we'll actually be able to put that on chain and reward people for providing liquidity within that state channel. And that's kind of the big aha, is that all of our efforts start to get backed by real world business activity that's defined by that business. And in Benjamin's example, it will be looking at how the entire federal government is using data, cryptographically securing data, while paying us or the network for hosting fees, for that validation fee. And it becomes a very big vision that why wouldn't you back and trust what Benjamin Diggles is doing, because he has all this validation, he has these contracts, and he's actually producing a really big channel of business that leverages the entire network. So,
hey, Ben, I just want to add. Yeah. I want to add one thing to that. I missed this as well. Is that not only are these, to his Mr. Jorgensen's point, other businesses, we're now starting to be involved in other proposals, because a lot of folks, going back to the Born a Vampire stuff, folks are like, hey, we want to do this new stuff, but it requires things like blockchain to make it happen. Who in the federal government has the most traction around this low level stuff? Oh, it's Constellation. We've been included in no less than 5 other proposals that are teed up for this year that will enter new books of business as well. So I just wanted to add on there that this is a bigger net than just a point solution, to your point, Ben.
So this compounds his efforts that are backed. And how do you support his efforts? Because they're using the network. Well, you have to reward nodes. So in Benjamin Diggles' state channel for federal government, he will have to provide rewards in the form of cryptocurrency, DAG, his token, that maintains the validation services that are procured for all of these efforts that he's doing. So we're truly ushering in and bringing transparency to what we're doing on the business efforts, as well as everybody that's building businesses on Constellation. I think there's another slide in there. Did I do another one? Yep. So now where does this stand? Well, our roadmap is always consistent with business and everything we build. There is so much intention behind everything. Next month, so if you look at this path of, hey, we're onboarding nodes from the community. Why did we go with community? Well, because community is what powers us. It's what creates our token value. It's what provides value to this entire ecosystem. You all provide educational resources, and you are the first to be entered into the community. Then we start opening it up to enterprises to start hosting nodes and start validating the network. Then we start allowing everybody to build state channels. First, it will be allowing people to build tokens and mint your token by defining your business logic on Constellation. Enterprises will then come and they'll be able to define their data types through a state channel. So as such, we focus this whole roadmap on providing clarity for token projects and following the same roadmap that we've been articulating over the past couple months, which is we'll have open submissions for token projects. That will happen next month. You'll be able to submit your token project to create an L0 token on Constellation Network. On Lattice Exchange, we'll open that up to every ecosystem. Hey, do you want to have your project or main chain listed on the Lattice Exchange, right? Once again, creating that global liquidity. Token projects will be on Constellation. Then we'll start ushering in governance, both on the LTX and DAG side. Start to evaluate these projects. Do they provide meaningful sinks, meaning currency sinks that contract the ecosystem? Do they provide value to the network? And we'll be working with the Stardust Collective to evaluate these proposals, and we'll provide feedback on how to make your proposal more robust. We already have about 10 really, really quality companies that are on the par of Lattice Exchange, some even above par of Lattice Exchange, that we're helping kind of curate that process to provide this end-to-end from development, submission of your project, to funding, to listing. So during that process, you'll start to see an evaluation of all these projects, and we'll be providing more transparency on the progress that they're doing. Backing of L0 projects will come. So later this year, as we articulated in the Lattice Exchange roadmap, we'll start opening up competitions, letting people vote, letting people back these projects at an early stage in their inceptions. We'll start integrating main chains. We're already having conversations with several of the main chain ecosystems that extend beyond Ethereum because they see the power in providing an easy way to transmit value or exchange currency from one ecosystem to another, because people want to build and use different ecosystems for different things. And then finally, that's going to open up this path of cross-chain interoperability and global liquidity, so that it will be very democratic, and that communities will decide where they want to back, where do they want to put their focus and attention, where do they want to back, what projects do they want to back, and why. And so we're going to be very agnostic to that, which is a very, very big vision that we've started really kind of planting the seeds and connecting all the dots, and how that relates to, Benjamin's efforts in the federal government, allowing people to back Benjamin's efforts in the federal government, knowing that those are backed by federal contracts, and having transparency on that, all the way down to token projects that provide APY programs, dividend-bearing products, all of which is coming down the pipeline in this year. So hopefully that kind of framed a lot of what we're building here, that these are actually all in motion. All of these things are in motion and in stride. This isn't a vision. These are things really happening. And I'm hoping that over the next several weeks, well, I've already planned, we're going to have a lot of guests that come in and start talking about each one of these buckets, right? We're going to have new projects that are building on top of Constellation that have really thought through their own tokenomics, that provide a sync to DAG, that provide leverage on LTX, and then kind of plant that vision of interoperability between main chains. So.
Well said, buddy. Yeah. I think that to your point of having all of these things in stride, which I'm not going to lie, as somebody who's got to multitask a lot, it can be a lot, a lot on a day-to-day basis, but it is it's working. And I think that there is an appetite for some of these cool partnerships and logos like SpaceX and so forth. But the best word I can think of what we're doing here is gestate. There's a lot of things that are gestating. The Space ISAC stuff, the Moby stuff, these are the federal government stuff. They take time to cook, they have to gestate. You have to get a lot of buy-in. But that's our one-to-many approach. For me to work with one company is not going to be as effective for a small group like us than it would be to work with a group that touches a lot of company. I could go and sell X customer, or I can work with a system integrator that has a book of 2,000 customers and give them a new capability. So that's why a lot of these things are gestating. And to that point, as I think we're kind of going to conclude this here, Ben, and I'll let you have the last thoughts here, but next week, I'm going to be presenting again, so hopefully you don't mind seeing my face again on Moby and some announcements there and where we're at, and kind of bring everybody into the fold on stuff I haven't been able to show up until this point. So excited to share next Wednesday on the Hypergraph Hour some of the stuff around our efforts in mobility, one of our gestations of one-to-many areas.
Yeah, thanks, Benjamin. I kind of leave everybody with this, and it's something from an ethos that, I look at a lot of crypto communities, and there's so much hope that exists, and that, like, man, I hope that team delivers. But in reality, these strategies are systematic. And if the strategy is sound and provides an easy way for people to connect the dots, you don't have to sit and rely on hope for one of these companies to flourish. And I personally don't need hope for Constellation. Everything is systematic in what we do and why we're doing it. And I know that we're the leaders in this space, which is exciting to me to see one of the most powerful teams I've ever seen in building a business challenge themselves on a completely different business model, and be able to incorporate a community into that narrative. Our community is not a soundboard. It is an essential piece to this roadmap on us proliferating. It educates enterprise people coming into Constellation. It allows us to think of, well, what is a data type? What is an L0 token? Is really just a data type. And yes, we're going to spoon feed the community easy ways to create a token with value associated. We're going to create a playbook for any company to add a sync to our network without a transaction fee, because that's just too simple. And I hate to say it, but it is such a simple and easy way out of this crypto community that it's a joke. You have to open it up to everybody defining this entire network.
Awesome. Well, we actually gobbled up most of the hour on that one, but I think that was a pretty hefty update for folks. I know that I've been sort of silent on the federal stuff. Those that know me in the company, I'm a heads down dude that just has to crank sometimes. So I'll keep surfacing myself again next Wednesday. You'll see me in all the stuff we're doing with Moby, which kind of is commercially focused. So excited to share that stuff. Otherwise, I think that we're all good to go, Ben. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week. I'm just checking with our marketing gal. So we're good. All right, love you all. Thanks for being a part of this journey.
Last thing, we'll have another update for Lattice next week. Some of you have sent me messages around what do you do with your LTX, and we've got a solution.
So Moby and Lattice next week. We'll talk to you folks soon, and have a great week.
All right. Bye.